Just because no one died doesn't mean that nothing happened. Just because you weren't hospitalized doesn't mean that you weren't hurt. And just because someone else had it worse doesn't mean it didn't affect you. We've been taught to measure trauma by spectacle, by how bad someone was hurt, by how long the trauma went on, what side effects the person had from the trauma. Did they go to the hospital? Were they severely injured? By headlines, by police reports, by visible scars. But trauma isn't about spectacle. It's about impact. And impact is personal. What may impact one person may not impact another. We have different thresholds. We have different capacities on how to handle certain things. Maybe it was your first trauma experience. Maybe it was your 10th, right? Either way, trauma leaves an impact wherever it goes. You may not fully realize the impact until you do. And when you do, there's oftentimes a feeling of, who would I have been without this experience? Would I have been stronger? Would I have been more assertive? Would I not have been as intuitive, given the fact that trauma oftentimes makes you hypervigilant? It makes you very aware of your surroundings. It can make you a little bit distrustful if you let it. But ultimately, it comes with lessons. It can potentially come with a purpose. For me, trauma made me want to help others who've experienced pain and hurt. As a trauma survivor myself, that is why I talk a lot about trauma and healing, because healing is very important. Being integrated and being able to make something from the experience so that that experience isn't wasted, so you can maybe help survivors of sexual trauma or survivors of domestic violence, which I've done. And for a while I actually did work with children who had experienced trauma, because I was able to talk to them and reassure them, which kind of helped me feel better about where I was and that I was making use of something that I understood, like most of you understand, right? You can grow up in a house where no one ever hit you, but what if they never listened to you either? You can grow up in a house where no one screamed, but you were constantly walking on eggshells, not knowing whether your caregiver was going to be in a happy mood, a sad mood, or an angry, frustrated mood, where they didn't want to talk to you, and they just stayed in their room and tried to avoid you. You can grow up in a house with food on the table, but your body wasn't respected. And that still leaves a mark, even all these years later. Certain things you find may trigger you. For instance, one of the things that I found that triggers me is very loud noises, being touched by someone, even accidentally, by someone who I don't know. I don't like people being in my face. I don't like people touching me that I don't know. And also neck tattoos, right? Little things, right? Smells sometimes too. And ultimately, it's kind of crazy how certain things trigger us and other things don't. Or it's almost like you get a flash of a recognition, but you can't. It's almost like you can touch it, but yet you can't. And I don't know if a lot of you have experienced that as well. But yes, trauma does change our brain. It does change things. And it also makes us stronger in some ways. You know, I mean, we don't want anyone we know or love to ever go through that. And so when we have children, we're definitely hyper vigilant. We do certain things that are coping mechanisms, thinking that we have some sort of control over what occurs. Unfortunately, I mean, it may make us feel safer, but ultimately, you know, control is an illusion, isn't it? Unfortunately. The problem is comparison. Comparison keeps people stuck. We say things like, it wasn't that bad. That person actually has physical scars. That person has endured so much trauma, like so much more than I've ever experienced. Theirs was worse than mine. But ultimately, no one has a measuring stick. Comparison keeps us stuck because it makes us feel like we should be grateful, right? Yes, we survived. We did. Bruised sometimes, battered sometimes, not feeling like ourselves sometimes. And right after that happens, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of just kind of going inward, not feeling like you want to disclose, because ultimately, when you disclose, there's questions like, well, you know, did you fight? Did you do this? Did you do that? You know what I mean? And it's almost like you have to justify your actions. I don't know if you all have seen the exhibit on what she was wearing, meaning what she was wearing before she was attacked. And that exhibit was amazing because it brought to light that survivors were going on about their daily lives. They didn't know that their life was about to change. And it plays into the stereotypes that people think that someone had to do something to cause that person to do what they did. And that is an absolute and utter lie, right? The only person who knows what they were going to do is that person who committed a crime on someone else. No one else is responsible. And oftentimes people pick their victims for a reason, for whatever reason. And that has nothing to do with the survivor at all. It has to do with someone who is a person who takes advantage of other people, who hurts other people because they are an evil, evil person. No one would do that to someone else unless they were a person who liked to hurt other people. And that sounds mature when you say, I should be grateful. We all should be grateful, right? We're living, we're breathing, we're here today. Where I'm at, the sun shines out, which is great because it's been frigid and cold and yes, I am grateful. I'm grateful to be sitting here before you today, talking to you and explaining things and having you tune in. That means a lot to me. I am grateful for every single one of you. And sometimes we minimize it, right? Because if we minimize it, you know, mine wasn't that bad. I didn't have it as bad as Sue. I didn't have it as bad as Tina, right? But minimization can become self-abandonment if we're not careful. We need to be checking in with ourselves. We need to be making sure that we're okay, that we're doing everything we can to keep ourselves moving forward, that we don't get stuck in that phase. And it's so easy to do, right? Because you're sad, you've been through something, so maybe you want to sleep more. Maybe you want to self-cope, you know? And oftentimes when you're self-coping, you're not really doing the healthiest things, right? You're not getting out and walking, you're not exercising, you're not eating right. You're not really taking good care of yourself because you just feel just blah. You feel like, what's the point? And then also there's almost the psychological thing where you don't want to maybe you don't want to put your makeup on. You know, maybe you don't want to look your best. Maybe you just want to be left alone, you know, because you're afraid. And that is a normal reaction. Absolutely normal reaction. And even if you're open to it and you feel like you need to speak to someone, there's no shame in that, right? Because sometimes they can help you process and give you strategies that can actually help. Whether that be a mental health professional, maybe be a psychologist, whatever it may be. Take care of yourself. You deserve that. You are worthy. Just because one monster crossed your path doesn't mean that it has to be a life sentence for you, right? Gradually, day by day, you're going to get stronger. You're going to realize your worth. And this is going to be something that you will remember, but it won't be something that will define you. You can define yourself however you want to be. So trauma isn't defined about how dramatic it looks. It's defined by how your nervous system adapted. Did you learn to scan moods? Most likely you probably did. Did you learn to silence yourself? Did you learn to shrink? Did you learn to overperform so that no one felt like there was anything wrong? Did you carry shame that wasn't yours? Because ultimately, the only person that should be ashamed is not the survivor. It's the person who perpetrated the crime. Because it was a crime. It was a violation. It was a boundary that should never have been crossed. And they should be ashamed for that. Ultimately, I've learned through personal experience that oftentimes sexual assaults are not prosecuted for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's the law enforcement who doesn't feel like the case is strong enough. Sometimes it's the law enforcement who believe that a lot of women are dishonest. I believe there's a Netflix series on that. There are people in the jury system who have outdated ideas about trauma and sexual assault and things like that. And ultimately, they can be difficult to find and to suss out. And ultimately, there is just a lack of trust for whatever reason. People just have their own biases. They have their own beliefs. And it can be extremely difficult to navigate as a woman and as a trauma survivor. Get really frustrated by ignorant comments all the time about things like that, ultimately. And so if you recognize yourself in the scanning moods, the silencing yourself, the shrinking, the overperforming, and the carrying the shame, that is the impact, right? But ultimately, I think that if there should be an impact, a good impact, a positive impact, it should be learning to trust your voice. It should be learning to trust your intuition. Because we all have intuition. We just need to learn to trust it. And that can be extremely difficult coming from a scenario where you've just been violated, right? But that can be a good thing to come, to be willing to trust yourself and love yourself again, because that's very important. And you don't need catastrophic trauma to justify healing. You don't need a dramatic backstory to deserve support. You deserve support by nature of being a human being. A person worthy of love, a person who's worthy in general, right? Because humans are worthy. We're all worthy. We all deserve love. We all deserve compassion. And you do as well. You don't need visible bruises to say this affected me. And here's the part people don't say. When you minimize your own pain, you train yourself not to trust your own signals. You don't have to minimize your pain. You don't have to shrink your pain. You don't have to edit your story so that people might approve of what happened to you, that you weren't in the wrong. Guess what? No one gets to put you in the defendant's chair and accuse you of anything. No one. And if anyone would try to do that, that tells more about them than it does about you. And that shows up later The impact of you not wanting to trust yourself shows up later in relationships, in boundaries, in food, in work, in self-worth. Trauma isn't one size fits all. It affects us in different ways depending on our personality, our quirks, and what our go-to coping mechanisms are. And neither is healing, unfortunately. Healing isn't about proving something terrible happened. Healing is about acknowledging what shaped you and deciding what you want to keep. Maybe you want to work on your intuition. Maybe you want to volunteer at a rape crisis center. Maybe you want to work with survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault or something along those lines. You get to decide where your path is going and what would mean the most to you. You are in the driver's seat. If you've ever told yourself it wasn't that bad, I want you to consider something. Maybe it wasn't dramatic, but if it changed you, and trauma often does, it matters. It's not something to be ashamed about. It's not something to hide from. It's part of your life experience. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about what happens when you grow up tracking someone else's emotions and why you eventually stop panicking. Thank you for tuning in to Recovering Perfectionist Mama, Grace in Progress. And I hope that you'll come back and join us again for the next episode. I know this was a heavy topic, and feel free to leave a comment if you like, or to ask some questions if that's something that you're looking into. And thank you for tuning in. It really means a lot to me, each and every one of you. And I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.